easy to get to. Stop later on.
I didn't look.
How are we doing, Bob? You didn't use the big one. I'm holding that in reserve.
Get airport.
Do we need to shut the light? We'll talk about it. No, I mean, we gotta.
Presentation?
Yes.
Ken's gonna say a few words first.
Oh, I'm gonna look the motion.
Okay, so we're now back in session for resolution 20-18-68, classification of employees for purposes of Wisconsin retirement system. I'd like a motion before we have discussion.
Okay, I'll make the motion, just so we can discuss this. On resolution number 2018-68 for the classification of employees for the purpose of Wisconsin retirement.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to just make just a brief statement, and then I'll kind of, I guess, I want to just present how we're going to move forward with how we're going to discuss this. So, I'll be honest, I'm going to be a little bit rusty on this one, in a sense, because it's been very difficult to deal with this situation. We've been discussing this for 2 months, and as I mentioned, the more you discuss it, the more stuff gets thrown at you, whether it's positive, negative. So, and one of those things that as you can imagine, right, you get stuff thrown at you or you have to deal with that, you start taking it personally and personalize it, and you want to come out fighting, you want to say, hey, I need to defend myself. And last week, I had the first seed planted was at Rotary, and they had the presentation on civility. And one of the biggest things they talked about is dealing with change. And when you deal with change, everyone's scared. Their employees are scared about the change. Management is scared about how the jail is going to run. You guys are scared about making the right decision. Heck, we're even scared about making sure we're doing all our due diligence to make this the right decision. So that was the first seed. The second seed was at WCA when they talked with the other fellow administrators getting, information. And they said, hey, this is your chance. You got to go after it. You got to make every point possible. You have to address this amount of paperwork that we got submitted and try to address every single issue. So I was dealing with that emotion, right? But then I had a good friend tell me that it's not so much of trying to deal with that emotion, but try to be who you are, try to be confident in what you do, and try to be honest in your leadership that you bring to the table. And I think that's what we need to do as a county board. The one thing that we do well is how we act and how we lead and how we bring integrity to how we operate this organization. So the decision today does nothing to demean those individuals in the crowd. And I can say that personally, I truly appreciate all your work. It has nothing to do with your work or your quality or dedication to the county. But I also, as your administrator, have to bring you the options that are laid before us. And that's what we're here for today. So, again, so it's not my character to make this a must-win. It's not a situation in terms of we need to fight. That's not. We're going to lay out the facts. You'll make your decision today. And I can guarantee you that either way, we're going to carry on with strong leadership to make it the best work environment possible. I guarantee that. So you have to understand that. You make the decision you need to make, but as management and as your administration, we will carry out that direction 100%. So with that, why I'm a little bit rusty is, if I can finish, one of the things I just would like to finish saying is that to Mr. Fisher's benefit, I probably took out about 40 slides that I was going to go through and try to address with all these issues that's been thrown at us. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to stay high level. I'm going to cover the topics at hand. And I actually told Kelly and Grant that's how we're going to do it. So we changed up. We worked most of the day yesterday actually addressing how we're going to approach this. So again, here's what we're going to do. So we're not going to be 100% scripted, as you can tell already. But here's what we're going to do. And I'd ask if you would just be patient with us and allow us to go through the presentation, so that way I think we'll cover most of your questions. But I'm going to have Grant just cover the legal perspective. I'm going to give you the short 101 version of why I think we're here. And then I'm going to go back to some slides that cover some of the high-end, big-ticket items that's been kind of thrown around. And then I'm just going to spend a few minutes on the budget model to give context to where we're at as a county. I'm not going to go a deep dive. And then I'm just going to circle back and let you know why we're here again. So, again, I just want to give context to our discussion. And one of the other seeds that I got from the civility thing is take a deep breath, exhale, let your shoulders go down, open your mind, right, and have that discussion, and then make the best decision you feel is right for the county. That's all I ask. And whatever that decision is, we will carry it out. I guarantee you that from our administration side. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant, and then we'll go through that part.
Please explain the acronym being used, though. Just so everybody knows what that stands for.
The WR.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes.
Hi. As Ken indicated, I'm going to run you as briefly as I can through the legal analysis. If we can go to the second slide. As has been stated numerous times, Door County is responsible pursuant to 40.06 sub 1 sub D of the statutes for classification of all participating employees for Wisconsin retirement system purposes. That includes the employees that are classified as protective occupation participants as determined, which is important, in accordance with section 40.02 sub 48 of the statutes. Now, 40.02 sub 48 lists specific positions that traditionally qualified as protective occupation participant status. What's important for this discussion is the position of jailer is not among the positions listed, and as I'll discuss later, typically does not qualify as a protective occupation participant. Next slide.
Please do one of the mics, please. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. That's fine. I'm usually pretty loud now. Now, the statute sets out a three-part test. And that is the standard that Door County must use in determining whether an employee should be classified and reported as a Wisconsin retirement system protective occupation participant or not. And that three-part test, which you're probably all tired of hearing about, is that the employee is involved at the principal duties of the employee. Principal duties is an important phrase. Involve active law enforcement, require frequent exposure to a high degree of danger or peril, and require a high degree of physical conditioning. All three of those requirements must be met for a position to be classified as protective occupation status. The Wisconsin Employee Trust Fund Board and, of course, the Wisconsin courts are vested with the authority to review and make determinations when issues arise regarding employee classification for Wisconsin retirement system purposes. Now, the question here of whether the jailers meet the statutory definition of protective occupation participant, it's important, has been litigated up to the Wisconsin Employee Trust Fund Board and on to the Court of Appeals. And what I think is important to remember as we go through this analysis is both the WETF board and any court that has reviewed a decision made by the WETF board over a number of decades has held that jailers do not meet the statutory definition of protective occupation participants. And to reiterate the fact that something was mentioned before, there's absolutely no question that the WETF board and courts have authority to make this determination. And that's why I have steadfastly maintained, and I think it's a correct legal position, that decisions from other bodies really are of no significance. We want to focus in on what the WETF board has done and what the courts that have been asked to review WETF board decisions have done. And I think that the WETF board and courts both recognize, when you look through the decisions, that because protective occupation participants can retire early, enjoy other significant employment benefits like disability, And the test is a strict one. The protective occupation participant designation is appropriately limited to a narrow class of employees who meet the stringent standards. And as I said before, the cases that have addressed the issue, particularly the 2016 ETF board case, which wasn't just limited to Chippewa County. That case came up and involved employees from 12 different counties. And when it came to the WETF board, and this is in the materials that I had sent you before the county board meeting, the positions that were chosen in that appeal were chosen by the parties, by the people representing the employees and the people representing the 12 employers as being, and I'm quoting from the WETF, representative of jailers throughout the state. And it provides information on how the WETF board will evaluate those representative positions when it comes to the question of whether or not they qualify for protective occupation status. Now, the case I'm talking about, the 2016 cases and some of the other cases I've cited, have discussed or have made rulings on the positions that are on the slide. Jail lieutenant, jail sergeant, jailer, transport deputy, Huber electronic monitoring deputy, and security deputy. So, active law enforcement. Various claims have been made that this isn't well defined. It actually is very well defined in the WETF board decisions and the case law. And what has been determined, again, over a number of decades in a number of cases, is that for something to be considered a principal duty, it requires that 51% or more of the employee's time must be spent engaging in that activity. In this instance, that's active law enforcement. The definition of active law enforcement, again, which has been established by the WETF board and courts over a number of years, is that the employee is actively and currently and directly involved in detecting and preventing crime and enforcing laws or ordinances of the participating employer. And that is fairly clear and straightforward too, yet the WETF board and courts have further refined that in decisions and where they've held that while the duties of a jailer, which they have classified as primarily custodial in nature, might provide an opportunity to see whether inmates are engaged in any illegal activity, that is not the primary purpose of a jailer's role, and it does not meet the definition of active law enforcement. So the way I interpret that is what happens within the four corners of the jail based on the WETF board decisions and the case law will not ever be deemed active law enforcement. The next standard, and again, remember, the positions, the employee has to meet all three requirements, the frequent exposure to a high degree of danger or peril. Based on, again, WETF board and court decisions, they have held that the jailer's duties do not subject them to frequent exposure to a high degree of danger or peril. Rather, that sometimes jailers are exposed to danger, and the holdings from those cases have clearly indicated that episodic moments of danger does not mean that a jailer's exposure is frequent or of a high degree. The final qualification requires a high degree of physical conditioning. In our case, there simply is no ongoing requirement of physical conditioning. I respect the fact that the jailers and the deputies and the employees in the Sheriff's Department may take that seriously, may maintain a high level of physical conditioning, but it's not a requirement in the job description. It's not a requirement of the job. So, and in answer to the question that was previously posed, why did the jailers in the WTF concede that case? Because it was a case then. It simply isn't a requirement of the job. Now, we've heard a number of miscellaneous other factors and arguments. I'm going to address the ones on the slide and then a few others. But one truth that comes from the decisions is a jailer cannot definitively qualify as a protective occupation participant merely by being deputized or rely on their status as deputy sheriffs. That in and of itself is simply not enough. A jailer can't qualify for protective occupation status simply through the county's decision to classify her or him as such in the past. Yes, we've classified people who work in our jail as protective occupation participant status since 1975. What I would argue is that the watershed events that require, not in a legal sense, but from a judgment sense, the county board to re-examine this were Act 10 and those subsequent decisions by the WETF board that were issued in 2016 that changed the landscape. Finally, from the perspective of the slide, the only way an employee may be classified and reported as a WRS protective occupation participant is by meeting the three-part test set forth in the statute as it's been interpreted by the case law. Bear with me for a second. Couple points I just want to raise is from a common sense standpoint. We know that 60 of the 72 counties have jailers that are general versus protective status. Some of those counties have had that status for decades, before Act 10, roughly 50%. After Act 10, that has climbed to 85%. Common sense tells you that if the doom and gloom and dire predictions we heard today were to come to fruition, those counties wouldn't persist in a path that led to that sort of insanity. The fact is we have 85% of the counties where the jailers are not protective occupation participant status. Not one of those counties that have chosen that path has ever reversed course. And we're left with a paradigm. Are we that much different than the other 60 counties? I would posit that we are not, just from a legal standpoint. The standards that are set forth in the statutes and the code and imposed by the state on the Door County Jail are the exact same standards that are imposed on the other 71 county jails. I understand one county doesn't have a jail, Menominee County maybe? So we aren't that unique in terms of our jail operations. And again, common sense would suggest that either the 60 counties that made this switch are completely insane and are continuing down this path to perdition, irrespective of what's going on in the county, or things continue as they were after the switch is made and the jail continues to operate in a way that is appropriate. I hate saying it this way. The other thing I feel compelled to do is debunk some of the myths that have been brought forth over the last few weeks. I will call them unjustified leaps of logic. First, the status quo does not have to change. The way we are operating, simply by making the decision to go from protective occupation participant status to general, does not need to change the way the jail operates. A few of the things that I know Ken will address and Kelly may address. We can start with the people coming into the jail. It is entirely up to this body and county decision makers whether or not we dumb down the qualifications for the people working in the jail. Right now, the people that come into the jail are qualified as law enforcement officers and has been spoken to. They are sworn deputies and they perform various duties. So none of that has to change. Just because you go from protective occupation status to general doesn't mean you can't also be law enforcement certified. They can continue to be deputized, they will continue to retain their status as deputy sheriffs, and they can be involved in what I will call active law enforcement. But again, remember the test. You can be involved in active law enforcement up to 49% of the time and still not qualify as protective occupation participant status. So, and there was, I think, some intentional wordplay here where we have what was said here and has been said at other places where we have deputy sheriffs that are temporarily assigned to the jail. The reverse is true. We have jailers who are also deputy sheriffs that occasionally and temporarily perform other tasks. There is no indication that those other tasks rise anywhere near to the level of 51%, which they would need to do to qualify as active law enforcement. And again, we don't need to change that status quo. the jailers, whether they are protective occupation participant status or not, can continue to occasionally and temporarily perform duties as deputy sheriffs. If we change that, it's because we made a conscious decision to change that. We don't have to. And there's not a magic wand, there's not a any rule that says because you go from protective to general that you can't continue to operate the way we are. So I guess to conclude, and I'll be, I assume, answering some questions, I'm somewhat blessed here because this is simple from a legal standard. There is a three-part test. There are decades of WETF board decision and court decisions that tell us what that means. And those, the statutory test and the decisions strongly indicate from a legal perspective that the jailers do not meet the test, that the three-part test under the statute, and their proper classification for Wisconsin retirement system purposes is, in fact, general. And I agree with some of the things Ron said. There's things we shouldn't consider here, and I could get vilified for this, but costs aren't the big issue. We're trying to do what's required of us under the statute. It's relatively simple. You look at the facts, you look at the statutory tests, you look at the precedents, you make a decision. Also, whether or not the employees affected will continue to be represented isn't something you should consider. You know, we've gotten off on some collateral tracks that I don't think we need to. We're human beings, and it's natural to go and consider some of the consequences, but the core decision and the core question that you have to make is whether these employees, whether the positions qualify under the statutory test as protective occupation participants. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Grant just stole some of my stuff, so I can jump through it, so I'll try to go through some of the stuff. But again, if I would go through what I'd like to cover is, again, some of the stuff that Grant's trying to get us to focus in on. Obviously, from his legal perspective, he told you what that is in terms of meeting that test. I guess if you go to, oh, I got it, I can do it. You know, from my standpoint, I'm looking at it in terms of the organization itself. And to me, there's two questions that I'm trying to answer for you. Can Door County provide the level of service expected by our taxpayers if we change this classification? To me, that's a critical question. Can we provide the level of service that our taxpayers expect? Second one, this is internal to us, but if we do make that decision, can it be done in a way where we treat our existing and future employees fairly? So that's my role, a little bit different from Grant's from the legal perspective of how we operate as an organization. I think you have heard from us that we think that the question of both of those questions is yes. But let me, I guess, in essence now, kind of go off topic, not off topic, but put some meat behind some of the bones of what's been going on. So again, Grant covered this one. Obviously, we're talking about certain areas in terms of wages, overtime, vacation, the retirement, and obviously the duty disability. So I'm not going to cover that. I think it's been covered in detail. I think this is the one that Grant referred to. I know it was asked one of our last meetings. Again, the question, why now? I think we covered that twice. I'll just state it again. I think, again, from my standpoint, obviously this is a continuation of Act 10. It got challenged through the courts in 2015. We did settle on our contracts for a 3-year term. This is our window of opportunity now to actually have this discussion. So that's why it's before you today. If you do look at the map, though, as Grant has stated, we have 60 of the 72 counties that are non-protective, 85%. It's 85% if you're doing the stats, mainly because we're not including Menominee because they don't have a jail. If you look at northeast Wisconsin, you can see all of the surrounding counties. The one that's closest that would be considered, that would be Winnebago. Otherwise, all of the other counties surrounding us are non-protected. I guess Grant covered some of this, so I'm not going to go into detail. But again, I think it's critical that we understand that there's a difference between just being deputized and what's being done in the position. And again, I'm saying this, I'm going to stay very high level because my main intention here, I'm not demeaning any of the work that's done by the employees, but there is a difference. If you look at page 67 and 68, and then page 70 and 71, you can look at the requirements for the position. As Scott had stated, we can adjust those, but as we operate now, there is a huge distinction in terms of the qualifications for those positions. In essence, our road patrol, the requirements are the 60 credits specifically related to that function of criminal justice. If you look at our other positions, it does not have that requirement. That is a huge point. There is a difference. We are, and I'll say this to Tammy and Steve's credit, we are very active in trying to find the best candidates possible to operate the jail the best way we can. But I will also say, and I'm happy to say this part, is that we do have individuals that do not have criminal justice degrees. They have basic high school diplomas. And I think Tammy will say this, and I'm very proud to say this, is that they are some of our best jailers. They've gone through the training and are doing excellent jobs. But they are different. They are not the same. What you see, and it's kind of hard to pick up, but if you look at when we hire someone, they go through the training. And if you look at that training, I can go through some of the stuff, but it's not related to doing road patrol, introduction to corrections, jail security, jail hostage, communication skills, ethics. I'm not going to read them all, but again, all of those are related to the operation of the jail. It does not make them qualified to serve as a road deputy. Can they serve those functions or made opportunities to serve in those functions because they're sworn deputies? Yes. But we do not do that. When they go to the road, they also go through their standard training that's entirely different than this. The only other thing I'd like to point out, and to me it's not negative, but we've kind of gone through this, and we kind of ignore this. But in 2015, when we actually negotiated the contracts, and at the sheriff's request, not mine, we actually separated the job hiring process between the jail and the road deputies. In other words, we were not going to use the jail as our training ground, mainly because we did not have people transferring from the jail into road patrol. That was not disputed. It was not something that was brought up by administration. It was not challenged by the union at that time. It was actually something that they wanted to implement. We had that in place for a year, and then they came back and said, well, you know what, we're not quite getting it. Can we change that back? We changed it back because this, but again, it's this whole thing that this model is so unique and we're destroying the model. Is this not true? We ourselves even questioned the model, and we made that change as part of our union contract in 2015. So that's the only part that, everything's been made up to believe that we're so unique, and I agree with Grant. We are unique, but we're not. The best thing I can also, I guess, kind of talk about is it's kind of what you need to operate, and I guess the thing I could make a comparison to would be our highway workers. If I brought John Kaloji in here, he'd probably say, you know what, I would love, let me take a step back. In our highway, we have equipment operators, which are a higher grade, and then we have highway workers. So we have two classes of positions. If I ask John what his preference is, he would say that he wants all equipment operators. And then he'll even tell you that as part of their crews when they operate, they're actually rotating to cross-train between all that. But the fact of the matter is that we don't need all equipment operators. It's not efficient for us to operate in that fashion. So we have that standard within highway itself. So this some context. I think this has been covered, but I think it's important to cover. Will we lose our employees? Of course. There's no guarantee. I can't stand in front of you to say that we won't. There's individuals that probably qualify for retirement that are still working that might take that option. I can't guarantee that. There might be some people that do want to go to road patrol. So yeah, will we have turnover? But I don't think we're going to have a max exodus. Because it's how we run our county and how we try to treat our employees that's going to matter. It's up to us to work and retain those employees. And I think it can be done. And again, I guess I go back to that map. Remember Northeast Wisconsin, there's no other counties around us that are protected. The other thing that we also hear about is the retention. I can tell you with all of our positions, we have significant issues with trying to recruit. The state unemployment, I believe, is somewhere around 2.8%, which means, in essence, there's a shortage of labor all over the place, and we're experiencing that. Human services, even our park positions, we have issues with recruiting. It's just the status of our market now. So to say that there's issues across the state, and there could be issues, we have them, regardless of whether they're considered protected or not. I guess the one thing also to point out is that we did go through this transition before in 2013. This body, maybe some of you weren't sitting here, made a decision in 2013 to implement Act 10 on 200 or so employees. Again, we made that choice to do that to 200 or so employees in 2013. I guess I pose back to you, what's the difference? And I guess how do you explain to a highway worker, for example, that this isn't then, that you're better, and we don't want to do that? That's out there. It's being talked about. So you need to understand, we need to be consistent. And it comes back to us in terms of how we treat our employees. It's very critical in that nature. Will it affect morale? Yes, it affected morale in 2013. Let's face it. It's going to affect morale. And again, it comes back to us, you, Grant, Kelly, the sheriff, the future sheriff, the jail administrator, all of us to show that we value the employee relationship, and we'll need to work on that and earn it. I will tell you that in 2014 and 15, just looking at old records, the morale, probably horrible if you look at some of those surveys, right? And I know some people are nodding their head. We'll have to work on it, yes, because it's a transition. Why? It's change, remember? Nobody likes change, and we need to work with change, and we can do it. It's not a decision of why we should not. It's been said a couple times, and this is one, are we trying to break up the union? That's not my role. My role is I'm working on information that the state has set for us. The fact that the state has made these determinations, and I'm bringing it forward, my goal is not to break up the union. My goal is to say, this is the playing field that was given us by the state. There's been a lot of things that we could disagree with what the state brought to us, whether it's the shoreline zoning rules, and some of the other things that we see being passed down. In each one of those cases, we deal with what the state has provided us. So the fact that we're doing this because to get to that end result, potentially, but it's not like I'm saying, hey, I feel like waking up this morning and I want to break up a union. That's not our intent. Our intent as management is to try to put the county in the best position moving forward. And again, we went through this with 200 other employees in 2013. This is the one that I think is critical, and again, I think Grant hit on it, so I'm not going to do it. But will it affect the candidates that we hire? And does it affect our training? No, these are critical answers. This is the one that's the hardest for me. I took the jail tour, and I loved it. I think fantastic work. My point to you is that unless the sheriff and their administration chooses to make it different, that'll be their choice. But as far as my choice, if this goes into effect, we're looking at January 1st. January 1st, the jail is going to operate just as it is today. And there's no reason why it can't. There is no reason why it cannot operate the same as it does today. But what about this one, protected versus non-protected working together? This is already common practice, and this is the one that I think that's why I thought it was nice to have Scott here. Across the state, we have this as a common practice. Right now, I just asked Kelly to put this together. We have sworn and non-sworn reserves that work for the county. These are all non-protected positions. We have 5 sworn reserves that can carry a gun, 6 non-sworn reserves, 4 special deputies, and we even have 2 that are part of a special dive team. Talking about hazard, that's one hazard I would consider. These are all non-protective. They are working side by side protective positions. Let's talk about the jail. Up to that change that we went from on-call to what we considered part-time, and I don't have the exact thing, someone told me up to like 30 years, and I don't want to throw out 30, it could be 20 years, but we've had on-call jailers. Those on-call jailers that were doing all those functions all those years were non-protected. Working side by side a protected position. 30 years or so, maybe 20 years, okay, I don't get caught in a number, but that entire time we've had those positions doing that. So, is this a money grab? Again, I agree with Grant, it's not so much a decision about the money, but from my standpoint, there is money that's on the table that we need to discuss. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail on that because, again, part of the decision isn't the money or driving it, but there is a huge fiscal impact on us as an organization. And given that we're in levy limits, it would not be right if I did not discuss it. So it's going to be hard to see the whole table, but I'll cut to the chase to keep us moving on here. The fiscal impact is about $23,000 per employee. That does not include our part-time positions. It does not include the $20,000 in premium pay. And it does not include the long-term compounding of us moving forward if we don't make a change. In other words, they're changing the wages every time we increase. That's a compounding impact on our bottom line. So, potential savings, today's dollars, probably at a minimum, about $560,000 is what we're talking about. Now, we're not taking $560,000. Again, what I'm trying to say is how we treat the employee moving forward, just as we did in 2013. We're going to do a transition, and we're going to go through, and I'll tell you how we're going to transition the employees. But at least in 2019, what do we see in terms of numbers? Just from WRS, the savings alone, we save about $110,000. And we also save at least $20,000 in the premium pay. I would say there's also savings in the overtime, but let's just say that's a wash because, again, not the other side, but the discussion is that we might have turnover. I'll grant that. There might be some, but we might have that either way. But let's take the overtime off the table. That's just in 1 year. And what the important thing is that the way we're doing this is a gradual change over time for the employees. And our goal is not to realize all the savings all at once, but we will realize savings over time. Actually, this one I'm not going to worry about. This one was just on the overtime, and to be honest with us, I actually respect Tammy very much in how she runs the jail. I can tell you that things are not trending the way we want, but I will say this, that I trust Tammy and her management to actually correct that. But I can show you that, at least right now, we were averaging $130,000, $140,000 in overtime, 14-15. 2016, I supported the change to go with the part-time. Obviously, that overtime went up, mainly because of the initial training. 2017, as Tammy has mentioned, was still probably a transition year, so it's still up. But I will tell you right now, the first 6 months, we're at $96,000. Now, is there situations that we can explain for that? Sure. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that even though we made this change, I still have faith in Tammy in trying to make this work long-term for us, because I trusted her management recommendation in making that decision. I guess the next one is obviously comparables. Now this one actually, and I apologize, it comes up small, but we have Kewanee, Brown, Calumet, Outagamie, Wapaka, Land Lake, Marinette, Oconto, Shawano, Manitowoc. pretty much all of northeast Wisconsin as far as we could get. And we ran all the numbers. Now, again, I put down start, mid, and max. Some of those are different depending on how they implement it. But if you look at the average overall, the start is around $20.31 to a max of $25.25. Our salaries are $27.59 to $31.94. Speaks for itself. Our proposed wage change, we still want to remain competitive. And in fact, if you look back at materials I handed out earlier, we actually worked with a consultant. And we actually went back and we looked at the grades. But we're looking at a range of $22.56 to $29.65. And with that, we have the ability to hire with it. The HR director has the ability to hire up to the mid-range right off the bat. And I have the ability to also exceed that depending on the qualifications of the person. The one thing I'd also point out is that this wage schedule does not include our projected cost of living increase that we're applying to the pay plan that's going to be proposed as part of the budget. So in essence, what you're seeing in terms of those wages, if you approve, will be higher than what's even being presented now. So let's talk about the transition. Again, I talked about the grade. The hours would remain the same unless it's determined different by the sheriff. Obviously, the overtime I put down would be reduced, but again, initially maybe it won't be. But in my mind, I think there's opportunity there. And the vacation and sick time would be converted to PTO and a sick time bank. I'll stress again, the job requirements training will not change unless it's the choice of the sheriff. On your tables, we handed out an addendum. If you so choose, you could adopt that addendum to make sure that you're confident that we actually follow through on what we're saying. So we actually outline specifically the transition, that the transition will go to a grade H. We will convert them following the policies that we followed back in 2013, so that way we ensure we're treating employees as fair as possible. For this one, I guess I'm going to skip that because it's really been covered about WRS and duty disability. This is the one I've heard a lot, and I know you're uncomfortable, but I'm not comfortable making the decision. Can we just wait to see if the state passes that legislation on the protective status? And let's just wait. I guess I'm going to speak for Grant on this one a little bit, but we should not wait for that. Our decision is based off what the legal standard is. Either we support it or not. We can definitely support the legislation as it goes forward, but we also know there's different versions of the legislation moving forward where there might be some aspects we don't agree with. We don't know. I guess we have been advising you that the best course of action, both legally, both from our operational standpoint and even financially, is that we should move forward. So, the other statement you can say, well, again, like in the other counties, well, you can say, well, this county administrator, corporation counsel, and HR director are not guiding us in the right direction. Plus the other 60 other counties don't know what they're doing. I guess my answer to that would be is that on part of that, you have to, I guess not in essence, not a matter of trust for us, but it's a matter of what are we doing to put the county in the best position moving forward? And I guess we're telling you that we are not doing this just because we feel it's a battle. It's more than that. It's where are we positioning the county. It's not a battle. It's our long-term operating for the county. And let's say worst case, just like the other 60 counties, we have an opportunity to change it back if we're the one outlier of the other 60 where it simply doesn't work here. Okay, so let me just I'm going to switch with Jill just for 1 second. I have to apologize, I'm going to be hidden behind the screen a little bit, but if you look at the screen, I'm going to walk you through this. And And I will go through in detail in the future on our budget model. So my goal is not to do a full presentation on it. But this has context in where we're going as an organization. So if you're familiar with the budget model in the past, really to get to the end game, this is where we need to look at in terms of how we're operating as an organization. So, and I apologize because right here is going to be our proposed budget for 2019. In essence, what you'll see, and we talked about this, if you look back in 2018, we actually had a surplus of about $1 million. And if you remember, when Mark Janiak was here, he kind of explained where that came from. When we refinanced our debt in 2015, we refinanced $2 million. The state, to our benefit, actually said, hey, county, you can actually count that below the line. So that was a one-time windfall that we had where we have an additional $2 million to grow into. And we've been growing into that. Obviously, it's dwindled from, 2 million down to about 1 million, and now for next year, we're going to be probably around that $100,000 mark, okay? Now again, there's other factors that are also going on at the same time in terms of that number that affects us. So for example, our investments, if you follow finance, our investments, we average, if you go back just a few years, we were rocking probably around a 0.75 to 0.9% return, right? Really good investment on your dollar. Well, the interest rates have gone up. So what's really interesting, now we're rocking it at about 1.6, 1.7, and some of them might even be tilting at 2% pretty soon. Well, what that does is that gives us new income. So this also includes new income from interest. We actually almost doubled our interest income. So if I would scroll up to what we're doing as far as revenues, there's other numbers that are built into this, but we actually have a pretty significant increase, about $400,000 that are an additional interest from just our investments. Because you have, in essence, we almost have like $40 million in our pool at any one point in time in our investments. Anyways, long story short, I don't want to go into detail because I'll do that when we do the budget, is that in the future, we are now at that point, and again, it's not crying wolf, and I always try to do that. We are going to be facing cuts in the future in some remedy unless there's something done with the tax levy. Next year, I think there's, $100,000 that can go any one direction. The one thing to point out, and this I'm just focusing on the revenue side, is really two things that affect us is obviously that interest number and also our sales tax number. So the sales tax number is the amount that we can apply to offset our tax revenue. So for example, in 17, we projected 3.75 million, and it came in higher. So we actually applied the surplus to that. Then we increase that each year. So now what you're saying is right now our sales tax are at record numbers. So for I guess what I would consider 2020, we're still projecting it to be about $4.1 million. If the economy continues to go along that path, we're okay. We are, Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're 12 years into what's considered a bear market, which by all estimation is supposed to, at some point in time, correct itself. So both this number and our interest number could reverse. In my model, I don't show that. So it's a risk that we're showing in the model. But in either case, these numbers are real. And depending on how the sales tax and our economy goes, it could be to the benefit or it could be significantly worse. So to me, it's not about the money, but as the administrator, it is part of it's about the money. And then this is one of the areas where I could feel I actually support Steve on some of what he's trying to do. So if we look at our operations in the jail, they are our first or second largest use of tax levy. So if we're going to correct this, we're going to have our major players take part in trying to meet some of these future items. can't go to Jill's office and cut her budget. There's nothing there to cut. Unless I take away more of her pens, right? So again, when we're talking about these cuts, we're going to have to focus on our larger expansion areas. If you heard of them today, and I actually support them some of that, if we look at our road patrol, we're probably very close to minimal staffing. Sometimes we only have 2, and sometimes during the peak season, we have up to 4 on patrol. Obviously, during events, we have the ability for them to sign up, and we have more people that are active. There's not much room there to make cuts. You heard Tammy already say that we do pretty much minimal staffing. So I don't have an opportunity to make significant cuts there. In our investigative division, we have just now worked, and it's actually going to their city council next week. We're actually looking at sharing an investigator position. So in essence, we'd be down to 2.5 equivalent of an investigator. I guess I would not feel comfortable, given our trends with opiates and all the other things that are going on, to suggest that we cut staff there. The other major area of expenses is obviously vehicles. We adjusted, working with Mark, our equipment purchasing, our vehicle. So we're actually putting our vehicles out as long as possible. So all I'm saying is, long story short, where are we going to find some of these dollars? Again, the decision shouldn't be, well, we're short dollars, so we need to make this decision to happen. But I'm telling you, as far as your decision, and again, when this goes back to what I'm saying, so here, Mr. Fisher, you always like when I get to the point, right? Here's my get to the point. Can we as a county provide the level of service that's expected by our taxpayers if we change this? My answer is yes. The only reason it would be no, unless it's the decision of the sheriff, not administration. If Door County makes a change, can it be done in a way where we treat our existing and future employees fairly? I say yes. It's going to feel like a no at first, but just like we did in 2013, we need to work with them and get to the point, and we have to stand behind what we say when we say we're going to treat the employees right. And again, I go back to Grant's statement. There's 60 other counties. All the counties around us have made this. None have gone back. So while we may be unique, I guess I challenge how unique we think we are in terms of our operations. I think it's more fear of change. And I go back to my original statement. It's our leadership, it's our integrity, and it's how we work as an organization and how we treat our employees. A difficult decision, but if we decide we can do it right, and if you decide not to do it, we will still move forward in either way. So that's my presentation, and we can open up for questions.
Mr. Chairman, can I amend my motion to remove the court security and probably the jail lieutenant out of this?
You just have to make a motion to amend.
I would like to make a motion to amend the, and take court security and the jail lieutenant out of the proposed resolution.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Grant?
I've had my say that can apply the facts to the law, and I'm comfortable as long as they're looking at the 3-part test and determining that these positions either meet it or don't. So I guess I'm not prepared to argue against it. I think there would be grounds to do either. So.
All right. Linda?
Just to clarify.
Yep.
So we have amended the resolution now that the proper classification of each Door County security deputy, security sergeant, transport deputy is that of general and not protected. Correct?
Correct.
So a yes vote would move them from protected to general. A no vote would keep them protected, correct?
Well, I guess, I don't think it was an override of the original motion. I think you have an amendment on the floor. So right now, if you're voting, you're just voting on the amendment to change the wording to, I guess, in essence, strike out the jail lieutenant and the securities. You vote on that first, and then you come back now to the amended motion and have a discussion on that, and then you need to decide. Is that correct?
That's correct. The motion to amend would merely remove the court security and jail lieutenant positions from the resolution.
David?
As it's written in the resolution, it shows court security / transport deputy. So that would be including the transport deputy title because they're co-shared?
As I read, what I heard, it would be the court security and
Correct.
jail lieutenant.
That's the way I read. I just didn't understand where the / came into the picture, like a dual listed employee.
Court security only was the amendment. No? Anybody else? Okay. So the vote that we're going to do right now would be to amend the original resolution to remove court security and jail lieutenant from the current resolution and leave them protected. Okay, everybody clear about that? So a yes vote would remove the court security and jail lieutenant from this resolution.
I think I'm saying it again, but then there's a second vote after that, which on the next.
Correct.
Yeah,
On the original
yeah.
resolution. Right.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll go to voter board.
It's not going. Oh.
Now you gotta hit yes or no first.
Oh, I did.
Okay. The amendment has passed, 19 yes, 2 no.
Want the lieutenant?
So the original resolution is amended to remove the court security and jail lieutenant.
Whoever.
Discussion? Comments? Questions? Biz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the administrator or someone give us a number of how much revenue the jail produces, like for 2017? How much revenue came in on the bed rental? What the revenue number is?
I don't have the exact numbers. I can have Mark run upstairs to get the budget book. I know that we actually increased that revenue to approximately $300,000 coming in terms of revenue. And I agree with Tammy that I appreciate all the revenue, but I can also say that we have I think it's $200,000, I think up to $250,000 contract for mental health services that we also signed. So I guess I don't consider that I guess I just want to present it that we're just bringing in cash to offset all of the other operations. There's significant expenses that are being done that we're adding within the jail itself that have gone up significantly. So if you'd like, I can get the exact numbers, but I'd ask Mark to go up and get the budget book if you'd like.
Well, the 300, I'm okay with the 300,000. At least that's a ballpark number. But I can tell you, and I don't want to repeat a lot of the things that have already been said, because, there's been a good case made on both sides, and this is a very difficult decision. But, and I think the administrator said that as far as revenue is concerned, a lot of this is up to the sheriff. But the jail administrator and the sheriff are okay with renting out a lot of beds. And I was really for this. And I can tell you that we were even doing it in the old jail before this one was even built. We were taking in Manitowoc prisoners And the sergeant at the time was Floyd Miller, who's passed away, but he used to give the checks to me and say, take them over to the treasurer when the check would come in from Manitowoc County. And I'm talking, it was a lot of money. But what I want to tell the board is, by every time you take in one prisoner or 20 more prisoners, you raise the potential of danger, you raise the workload, and especially, the danger of something happening. So right now, currently, we're taking in, a lot of prisoners, which is good, and a lot of revenue. But I can't promise you of what the sheriff decides to do, in the future, that if he wants to lessen the workload and lessen the potential of danger in the jail, he can say, well, we don't have to rent to the state, and we don't have to rent to all these counties, which we're doing now. And it'd be terrible if that 300,000 just got erased and gone. You know where I'm going with this? The sheriff has a tremendous amount of statute power in whoever the sheriff, turns out to be in this next election. But the other thing I want to say, besides, and we already used jail bed revenue to offset the treatment court. We just voted on that this morning. And hopefully that revenue is there. But the sheriff currently has a lot of options on how to use the jail people as far as serving papers, SWAT team, transporting prisoners, and all that. And if we go ahead and erase this protective service and go to general, the sheriff may decide that I don't want to put these people in harm's way. They're not. Here you got one deputy that's protected, another one that's not. However times they're used, I think is irrelevant. It could be one incident where that unprotected person, gets injured or something more severe happens. So some of the options for the sheriff could be gone. Now, he may decide to go ahead and use them anyway. I don't know. None of us know that. And it's just something that I have to consider because I was there for 30 plus years and I know what they're up against. And this is a real difficult decision for me too, because I can see Grant made a very good case and Ken made the real good case of why we should change it. And just because 60 counties did it doesn't say that we have to. We can make whatever decision we want here. But and all this what I just said, I'm not guaranteeing anything here. Who knows what will happen in the future. If we do change it, and they decide not to rent all these beds and put more risk in the jail and taking on all these people, I think they said in 3 years from now or whatever, we can change it back and then make it protective and hopefully then rent all the beds again. Now, I'm just making a hypothetical case of what could happen. So I guess I've had my little say on it, and I won't take up any more time, but thank you anyway.
Ken?
Yeah, I had decided I wasn't even going to talk on this issue today, but I would, unless I'm totally wrong, if I am, Mr. Verley, you can tell me, we pick and choose who we want to rent to. We're not renting to the hardcore criminal here, giving beds to them. We're renting to and taking the most docile criminal we can find, and if they create if there's any hint of trouble, we ship them back, bang, right away. So don't let Mr. Verley's analogy scare any of you. Just because we have more inmates here doesn't mean we're going to have more trouble.
Supervisor Fisher is absolutely correct.
Thank you.
But he's absolutely correct. But we had contracts with Manitowoc County and even with the state that if we take in a prisoner and he turns out to be a bad actor, we can make, and this was all the way back when I was working, so we're talking more than 20 years ago, we could call Manitowoc County and say, come and get this guy, he's causing chaos in our jail, and they would be, usually in the same day or the next morning, they'd be up to get the prisoner. So Kenny is right, but that doesn't change the potential of another prisoner that's been very cooperative, and all of a sudden, so the danger is still there. Every time you have another prisoner in the jail, whether it's 20 more, 30 more, however many beds that we're renting, the potential is there. I'm not saying it's going to happen. When David Engelbert, Supervisor Engelbert, was chairman of the ad hoc committee to build this place, and we went through the recall election and everything, we wanted to build this big 110 bed jail. And that was because we thought we could continue renting beds and be like Shawano County and bring in $1 million a year that they got from Brown County in renting beds. And when I was chairman of the law enforcement committee, I asked that, that we rent more beds? And the answer was, well, if we do, then we're going to have to ask for more staff. But Administrative Tammy is doing it with the same staff. She didn't require more. So she, excellent job. They are getting it done by renting all these beds. But I just have to bring this revenue up because, and it may stay the same. Maybe they keep right on renting beds if we change this. I have no idea what the sheriff would do. So, thank you.
John?
Yeah, I've got to bite my tongue on a few things, and I'll try to not go off the handle, but I agree with Supervisor Verley. Having the law enforcement background, I have dealt many times inside of that jail coming off the road to assist the jailers during times of peril. And without getting totally gross on what can happen inside the jail, there's things like urine and feces and getting punched in the face and wrestling with one or two inmates that causes a multi-positional reaction in the jail from other inmates. It is a hazardous place. It depends upon the character of the inmates that are in there at the time, and to look back and try to judge 51% of when it happens or doesn't happen, I think is ludicrous on anybody's part to think that it couldn't happen at any given moment. The jailers, as we have them, are certified law enforcement officers, deputies that have gone through an academy put on by the LESB. The standards of the LSB is to have top physical conditioning. That's part of their training. I was on the Law Enforcement Standards Board. That was part of their training and is part of their training. The problem with that is it doesn't carry through once you leave the academy and graduate. They leave that physical conditioning up to both patrol and jailers and juvenile officers, etc. That's a personal goal that each and every member of law enforcement, including jailers, should always have. As far as the 51% in the high degree of physical conditioning, I think our jailers do work every day trying to keep our jails free of crime, drugs, anything else that can come along. They do jail cell searches on a regular basis looking for weapons. Homemade weapons. That is a common thing that goes on within jail systems. It's a common thing in the prison systems. This is a high-risk job. They have to stay mentally focused and prepared on a daily basis. There is no option for them other than to do that if they wish to survive. We talk about the high degree of danger. Our officers on the streets, they look, they stay alert all the time. It's no different on the inside. The people that our patrol officers are bringing into the jail system have violated a law, or are criminals, or are waiting for trial. We've housed homicidal suspects. We've housed some of the most dangerous people that I can imagine, being out on the streets within our own county. I believe our jailers exemplify what they have done as far as keeping the people safe, both within the county, in the jail, and on our streets. I'm guessing, and the sheriff can correct me if I'm wrong, there's over half of them that are certified as law enforcement officers. They have gone through that training. We dual train them so they can come out onto the road. I would be very disappointed not to see that we remove their protection on the retirement system end of this, and that's what this is really about. I have no doubt our administrator and our human resources will do the best they can do with what's left over to treat our employees fairly. I do believe that. I never thought this was about a union-breaking option of any kind. But I do hold highly the regard of what our officers do in that system. We don't see it as we sit behind a desk, all the dangers and things that could happen at any given time. I was bitten once in the jail, taking a prisoner from the jail cell to the courtroom in the elevator. An outright one individual, 4 officers had to subdue him in the elevator. That bite related to me having to go to the hospital because it was noted that the subject had HIV. These are all conditions that our officers go through, unsuspectedly at any given time. They deserve the right to be protective. We had classified and protective in the past. This ruling from, we keep eluding it back to Act 10 is why we're doing this. The requirement to report to the retirement system has long been before Act 10 ever came along. I don't see anything that has changed from that day when we said, yes, we classify you into protective, to now, that they've changed their duties any differently. In fact, I think their duties become more difficult because of all the litigations that go on. Any little thing that's done wrong, there's a lawsuit. From the jailer, perspective, it's the inmates creating the problems that create the lawsuits that put us in more peril. And as far as doing outside duties of their jail job, if they do snowmobile patrol, extra patrol for parades or et cetera, whatever, however the sheriff uses them, if they're not in protective service, why would a sheriff want to put those people out there for those perils when they're not protected or get any extra benefits for doing that? If I was sheriff, I would not utilize those people in that manner. These are other things you need to consider, ladies and gentlemen, and that's what I'm asking you here to do today. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was going to keep it short, but.
Megan?
Thank you, Chairman. When this first came up, it didn't give me a good gut feeling, okay? And I don't make all of my decisions on gut feelings. As a supervisor, I feel like it's our responsibility to do a lot of research, talk to our constituents. I did both of those things. So in talking to my constituents, I had some really good conversations, and not one person that I had this conversation with understood how it would be assumed that there was less danger in the jail. In fact, most of them considered it more dangerous than our deputies that are on the road. So that being said, the second part is I started doing a bunch of research. And some of you may or may not know, that's pretty much what I do at the majority of my time these days is I'm finishing up my thesis or my capstone for my master's. And that's in the area of wellness. And one of those areas right now that I'm studying is wellness in the workplace. So there's 2 points I want to make. The first one is when we're looking at wellness in the workplace, the 3 points that are considered most important for employees are, 1, compensation, that they feel that they're being fairly compensated. 2, that they feel valued in their position. And 3, that that position, that job gives them meaning and purpose. When it comes to meaning and purpose, I think based on the personality of a lot of folks that are in law enforcement, it's an intrinsic motivation that they have to give back to the greater good and to their communities. When it comes to monetary compensation, that too should reflect the amount of danger that they're in. When it comes to being valued, one of the things that comes up in research is the ability to job craft. And what that is being able to change your job in order to fit your needs and your strengths. And with something like our sheriff's deputies in the jail, they don't really have the opportunity to do this job crafting due to the structural nature of that position. So that value piece can be a little bit obscure. Secondly, then I started taking a look at what research was out there, and I'm talking peer-reviewed research, what papers have been written, and the epidemiological research, which is a fancy word for population research, indicates that police officers have an increased risk for death, for an early death. I'm sorry for the facts I'm going to share here. You all are probably well aware of this. Folks that work in our jail, as was stated earlier, have to be on high alert 100% of the time. Their presence alone, I believe, is active law enforcement. So having to be on that high alert 100% of the time, this is what makes our jailer deputies different than other employees that have been moved to general. What happens when you're on alert 100% of the time is you're under a ton of stress, and that increases cortisol. And then from a health standpoint, the reason that the average death age of an officer is over 10 years lower than that of someone who has not served in law enforcement is because stress causes cardiovascular disease, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, metabolic syndromes, many different cancers, lymphatic, brain, digestive, bladder, skin, and also acute and chronic psychological stress. This has been proven to increase the rate of addiction and also the rate of suicide in law enforcement officers. So all of that being said, again, going back to the average death, I believe it was from 2012, what I found was 66 average age of death for a law enforcement officer, whereas at that time of that research, average age of a non-law enforcement officer was 77. So I feel that we not only have a responsibility to our taxpayers when we're looking at money, and actually it is questionable that this would be in their best interest in the long run. I feel like we also have a responsibility to our employees, especially those who are knowingly taking on this increased level of stress on a daily basis. I invite my fellow board members to vote against moving our deputies to general status for our jailers. I'd like to see how this shakes out across the state with legislation that's coming up, and if needed, revisit this in a year or two, give it a little bit more time. I will also, in that statement, urge the union to consider giving up some of their leverage on wages and overtime. I want to go on record as including that. I want to say that not all change is good necessarily. This is different than 2013 based on the position that these individuals are in. And we can't put a dollar value on years of life. What we can do is maintain local control here of this decision and decide what's best for Door County at this time, right now. Thank you.
Megan? Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the administration for bringing this to our attention. It gave us great support to investigate this. I'd like to point out today that in the Justice Center itself, a little bit different than Kewaunee County, administrator from Kewaunee County mentioned that the jailers and the dispatchers are one and the same. Our county is a little bit different. Our dispatchers, 911, are general employees, as well as the clerical staff in the sheriff's department and the jail. So that's just one difference than Kewaunee County. Thank you.
Dave?
Several of the items brought up are directly related to basically income. This is a retirement-related question, as well as a partially a disability and early retirement aspect. What I'm wondering is, we've talked about, and we've gotten assurances that we'll treat these, if we go through with this, that we treat the current employees substantially the same. How do we know we're going to do that? How do we as a county board feel that, that will be the effort, rather than 2 years from now, there'll be an effort to drop the current wages because they're not in a union anymore?
I don't have the authority to change the wages, so anytime our pay plan changes, it comes to this body. So it's ultimately this body to review those wages and I guess address the wages as they move forward. As I said before, like I said, in my mind, the wages that I presented to you are going to go up, bearing your support, because we're going to age the plan, so.
There are no legal ramifications if we stay in this status, correct? Other than the fact we're effectively not following the guidelines of the statutes.
I guess it depends what you mean by legal ramifications. The status quo would persist, but there are certainly legal ramifications to making the decision or not making the decision. And one thing I was going to quickly follow up with what you said previously, David. The county board shouldn't be afraid of taking control of the wages, hours, and conditions of employment of a subset of employees. Using Megan's example, that is the ultimate local control, the county board being in control of that stuff. And the answer to David's question, I think, is entirely up to the 21 of you to decide, if you decide to reclassify these employees from protective to general, then setting their wages and hours, conditions of employment, benefits will be entirely up to you. And if it changes, it will be because a majority of you have made a decision that it should change, not any outside force. So,
Can I just ask?
Vinnie?
I was just going to ask on that. So I'm trying to understand, that does not mean, though, that the current level of protective dollars they receive at retirement, we could not decide as a board to make that the same. That's not on the table right now, right?
No.
So I don't know how it can be the same if it's different.
I guess what we say, well, let me just clarify. So I guess what we're saying is the same. Besides the changes of what we're talking about in terms of how they're transitioned, there's no reason why the jail on January 1st can't operate the exact same way as it does now.
And I was
That's what we're saying. There's no reason for that to change. And again, in this one thing, this to add on that, because I have to make sure, I don't know if I did make it clear or not, but again, we keep on coming back to this, that, the protected, unprotected, why we put someone out there. We have 12 individuals that are non-protected that the sheriff has the right and has done, where these individuals are out on security. They've been at fairs, they do transports, they do that. Up to 2016, when we made the change for the jailers, we've had on-call jailers for 20-some years that served in that same function, working in the jail, unprotected. So I guess I just want to make sure you guys understand that. I mean, I'm not trying to say that, but it's kind of hard to say, well, we don't want unprotected and protected work. We've been doing it. It's been our practice.
I can just clarify. My question was more based on the benefit the employee receives, not if the jail will be the same. But if you're saying, I guess I don't understand exactly what Grant means by, if we're able to act as a board exactly the same as what we have now, but we're not saying that we're going to do that, correct? As far as for the employee,
No,
not for how the jail looks, but the employee would not have the same level of benefits that they
Correct.
have.
So
Yeah.
that you are 100% correct.
Yeah.
So, and what we're saying, and that's where it comes back to what I was talking about the fiscal. So if you would do a radical change, there's that dollar amount that I had mentioned before. I guess we're not trying to tap that. What we're saying is that we transition them to the pay plan. All those existing employees would be, in essence, transition to the pay plan. If they're above the maximum of the pay plan, just like we did in 2013, they're red circled. In other words, they stay red circled until the pay plan catches up. That's the one part. The other part is, for example, like you said, the WRS, that portion that we contribute, we do not make that to the state. the portion that they contribute is not collected and sent to the state, but they pay their, what I guess would be considered the standard WRS rate for GMEs.
Thank you.
And I guess, and again, I'm sure they'd also want me to point out that obviously the other part of it is there's no duty disability.
You know, I guess part of my issue here with this is really simple. The nature of my job requires me to read and code and interpret it based on its intent. I don't feel that I personally believe they should be general purpose, general employee status. To me, I've not seen the evidence that 3 items have been supported to support them being protected status. Reading the statute, it clearly indicates that, in my mind, they're not part of the law enforcement part of the world. 60-plus counties are at that stage already and have not returned to protected status. Purely looking on numbers, emotions removed, purely looking on income lost or gained due to one reason or another, to me this is an easy, it has become a relatively easy answer and should be voted yes as a general status change.
Linda?
Is there a contract involved here if they're retained as protective occupation status right now? Is there a contract that's expiring January 1st? And if we retain them as protected, are we entering into another annual contract, 3-year contract, or can this come back every single year?
Well, let me answer the first part. So, yeah, our contracts are expiring at the end of this year. This is part of why we're discussing it, because if, through the negotiations, if we're pulling them out, they would not be part of the negotiations for the next contract. In terms of negotiating a contract, once this is decided today, we will, I guess, commence with what they call is changing your positions, and we'll start negotiations and try to settle on a contract. I guess the term will be determined by both parties. We both, suggest a date and a time, and that's all negotiated through the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make one other thing clear. As long as you invited the Kewanee administrator up here, I want to tell the other supervisors, there's no comparison whatsoever, none, between us and Kewanee County. Kewanee County is operating like we did many years ago as jailer dispatchers. They're running the communications as well as the jail, and they're a little jail. They're probably one of the oldest jails, if not the oldest jail in the entire state. And there's no comparison. We're a much larger jail. We're renting beds and have a lot more prisoners and potential for problems than they have down there. We have a complete staff of people that run our 911 center that do all the communications for Door County and EMS and City of Sturgeon Bay PD. So, there's no comparison, between us and Kewanee County as far as them being general employee status in the jail and us protective there. I just have to say that there's no comparison there whatsoever.
And Bez, I apologize if you think that's my intent. It's just that, I guess, they chose to use Kewanee County and they chose to make all those statements. And yeah, so likewise, if you don't think it's a good comparison, then we shouldn't be comparing them then. Yeah, and I could have got, I could have got administrators from other 60 counties, but that was the one that they chose to compare. And I just felt they deserved the right or the opportunity to at least
They probably do not
explain how they're operating.
They probably do not have very little or no revenues coming in. Like we have tremendous revenue, and I hope that continues if we change this. And I'm not looking in a crystal ball and tell you whatever a sheriff is going to decide to do as far as raising potential in problems in the jail. I'm just telling you, we have a lot of revenue. I think they're the oldest jail in the whole state.
Well, Ken and I have talked about this before. I'm wondering why we can't do a 1-year contract with them and see if this SB 577 goes through and make our decision for next year.
Again, and I'll let Grant defer, but again, it's really it's a decision of whether you think they're in or not. Mm-hmm. And if that legislation takes ground, we can fully support it and adopt it, but, I mean, to me, they're two separate issues. I mean, it maybe makes your decision you feel more comfortable, and I understand that part, but I think what Grant would argue, and Grant, take my words out, is that's not the standard of making a decision. The standard of making your decision is, do they meet the test? And if they don't meet the test, then you should vote on them meeting that test. And if the legislation gains tracks and we want to support it and lobby for that, like through our legislative days, we have the right to do that. But that's really not, Grant, if I'm wrong, that's not the way we should address the decision. I don't know if you want to add on to that.
No, we've kind of cycled back to my presentation. There's a three-part test, and the only factors that are relevant are whether or not the positions we're talking about meet each of those three tests. And it's good to talk about all the collateral matters because it puts things in context, but at day's end, we're looking at whether or not that three-part test is met by the positions that are referenced in the resolution.
Susan?
I don't know, I'm debated whether I should say anything. But two things need to be said, and I guess I'm saying them to the folks that may be affected by this and other employees and the public. One is that we pay our administrator to look ahead to budgetary issues and project. We've told him many times he needs to troubleshoot whether we're going to get in trouble. And so in that respect, he's definitely doing his job, and we need him to do that job. What I would say, in addition to the employees, is this levy limit thing. I know there's the three-part thing, but I'm not sure I totally believe that we would really be revisiting this if we weren't up against levy limits. But it's real, and we are up against levy limits. And levy limits need to change. At the very least, we need a modification that allows a cost of living modification, but it's not going to happen unless other people besides the 21 people on this county board let their legislators know that local governments, this is unsustainable. So I'm asking them to help us do that. Aside from all of that, I can't support this. I just can't. When we were at, I went through the jail, I've been trying, and I know there's the three-part thing, but I got to say, and I'm not a lawyer, I simply don't agree with the interpretation of that based on that court case. For whatever reason, that's how I feel. But after going through the jail, and I did a kind of an informal poll at the Wisconsin counties, and when I would meet new people, I'd ask, are you in a protected county or an unprotected county? And the people that were in the protected counties seemed pretty comfortable with the decision they'd made and being that way. And the people who were in the unprotected counties were talking about being concerned about turnover. So it was not scientific. I didn't get to all 72 counties, but the ones I did, that was their reaction. And then one of the sectionals that I was in was on juvenile corrections, and one of the presenters was the lady who is the head of the division in the Department of Corrections that does the inspections on jail and prison and other correctional facilities. And so I went up and asked her, and Helen came up and we talked with her. And again, this isn't the reason we should decide this way, but it confirmed to me, her comment was, jails are so much more dangerous now than they used to be. In many cases, they're more dangerous than prisons. And in her mind, that court case had been presented poorly. She truly felt that this is a part of law enforcement. If this is your consequence for violating the law, then it's got to be part of the justice system and part of law enforcement. So there's no way I can vote yes on this.
John?
I think before we make a decision on this, I would just like to thank all the participants in the back of the room that have given their opinions and their thoughts and suggestions. I think it's very important to hear from them. And I would hope that we don't disregard the things that have been said by our sheriffs and our administrators. Those are true statements. They should mean a lot to us on how we make a decision today. But most importantly, I'd like to thank them all for the job that they do. And whatever the decision is today, we know you'll carry out your duties to the best of your abilities. Thank you.
Joel?
It's been going on and racking in my head like everybody else's probably for months as well too. But as chair of law enforcement committee, I made it very clear going into this that I didn't know jack squat about law enforcement coming on. So this is all very new. But the thing that keeps going on in my head here right now is starting off with Grant's presentation here, where he made the comment as part of the the presentation about, based off of legalities and the statutes as they're presented, that everything within the four corners of the jail is not active law enforcement. And although that's been deemed that by the ETF and everybody else in the state, that's not a statement that I don't think is very fair personally, because in my mind, when somebody puts a badge on, they're an active law enforcement, period. And that's where I guess where I keep going back to that comment, because hands off, kudos to everybody that does that, because that's just, I don't want to deal with them. I don't think any of us do ever. But, so kudos and hands off, and thank you to everybody that is involved there. Going and writing some notes here, but, and also to Ken, I mean, we've talked briefly about this, and I've also made the comment to constituents here and everybody else that anybody that thinks that Ken is a bad guy in this or anything is wrong, because he's doing his job, and we all better appreciate that. And I emphasize that, we all better appreciate that. Even the people that this might affect, because that's why he was hired. So I commend him, hats off to that. I lost my track on my notes here, but again, I don't know, it just, whether we go with our hearts, our guts, the numbers, the budget, all that stuff, at the end of the day, it just, I'm not going to support this, and not because I understand the budget side of it. I remember the very first day sitting at this table 11 years ago, where Grant told everybody, we're the county, we operate by statute, period. That's the facts, that's the truth. We all know that as county board supervisors. That's how we operate the business and the organization. But I also believe that the state and the ETF and whoever wouldn't have given the counties the option if they didn't want us to have it by having the out in the rules, in this per se statute. So I'm going to exercise my right as having that out and not support this at this point in time, because it just doesn't sit well with me. I can understand where everybody's come from, all sides, I truly do, but I'm not in support of this at this point in time. So that's just where I sit on it, and I had to say it.
Ellen?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Joel said. A lot of this is new information for me, and I think I don't feel like I'm not comfortable making this decision at this point, because people say, well, if you don't like it, you can move back, but we know that that doesn't work that way. You don't go back. And I, too, went around and talked to as many people as I could from other counties, and the talk with the woman that Susan mentioned was very informative, because she knows all the jails in the state. And I guess, I don't feel like I can vote yes at this point, but that doesn't mean that between now and when the contract is up again, I am not going to be doing a lot of thinking. Hopefully I'll be back on the board, that I'm not going to be doing a lot of thinking about it. And I guess if for some reason this doesn't go through this time, not only we as county board supervisors need to really think about this, but I think also the employees of the jail need to think about this also. I don't know, that's just kind of the way I'm thinking about it, and I'm not really sure I feel comfortable making a decision right now. And I feel bad, because I come from a kind of a management past, and I worked for a big organization, and I know how to look at the management end of it, and I guess I agree with the management end of it, but then I look at the employee end of it, and I look at the safety issues in the jail, and some of these three criteria have not been real obvious to me. When I've talked to people, I've talked to the people in the jail, I took the tour, they just don't jump out at me as being understandable in my mind, I guess. I need to rethink some of this stuff. So at this point also, I really feel like I need to wait and get more information.
I guess I'll say something. I can see everybody struggling. We've been struggling for 2 months, because what we
get in our head, and our paper is different than what we get in our heart. And if you listen to everybody here, you listen to the sheriff, everybody in the departments and everything, you have to listen to your heart. Okay? So it's very difficult. It's a difficult decision. And I don't know how to give you the answer other than to tell you need to vote. In this case, I would say you need to vote with your heart, because your heart and your head are connected with this one. When you listen to people, you listen to employees, you listen to sheriffs, you listen to deputies, and everything that they're involved in. So that would be my advice. I know Ken has another.
Well, Grant was going to, do you want to go over that? I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
okay, so here, well, there is a punt option. Okay, now, this way. So again, and
There's a punt option.
so, and again, okay, so here's the thing. In other counties, well, okay, let's put it, you have an administrator, right? There's administrative coordinator, administrator, and there's the exec. So the question would be is, what authority do I have as your administrator to take actions to move forward? In other counties, administrators have taken this directly to have written, or the notice that you're reclassifying them, and actually said, okay, we're reclassifying them. We'll take on that burden of that decision, and if we're challenged, we'll go through the challenge. So ultimately, you're out if you don't want to make a decision. But in essence, you're just putting it on me to make the decision, which you kind of know where I'm at. So, but it is a punt if you don't feel like you want to vote, because I guess what we're saying is that, I guess we're willing to say that from our position, if you think that we're giving you the wrong advice, then, okay, let's go through the process and let's take it to the ETF board and let's have it be decided. That is an option. That is an option that you can consider. It's been done in other counties. I didn't want to do that because I did speak with Dave on that. I think our relationship is very strong, and I don't think I wasn't comfortable, I guess, challenging or using that authority. I didn't find value in that. So, but Grant, is that correct?
yeah, it's accurate, and Ken and I had discussed that. I clearly think it falls within the authority and responsibility of the county administrator to make that decision, but we, I think, jointly and Ken in consultation with David, made the decision to bring it forward to county board. But as David pointed out, I certainly sense that you're all struggling to make the decision. If that's the case, the so-called punt option would just be to defer the decision to the discretion of the county administrator. If there is a challenge to that decision, then the ETF board would be able to review it if it's
I appreciate, from my perspective, Ken be willing to take his broad shoulders and shoulder that for us, okay? But I also think it's time that we put on our big boy pants and our big girl pants, okay? And make the decision.
That's fine.
So, David?
I'll second your comment on that, Dave. I think that's our responsibility. And I didn't say anything earlier, but I guess, it's been alluded to Act 10 was what pushed this, but I'm one of 3 people that was on the board back in 2000 or so, and we started looking at a jail and the whole court security and everything else. That was a time when we didn't have the transport officers, we didn't have some of the court security, and all of those things were being developed. And there were some of the counties that we went to and looked at jails already had civilian jailers. And we went the route of the civilian dispatchers, but we didn't separate the jail from being under the sheriff and making them civilian at the time. As Tammy alluded to, I believe there was a trailer parked at the site where we had a couple officers. I think Tammy was one, and they were developing all the policy and procedure and so forth for the operation of the entire facility. I think they did a great job with the struggles we had. I'd say far bigger than this one, and arrived at a management decision that has proved successful over the years. And I plan to vote to keep them protected.
Laura?
Now that the waters have all been muddy and we're talking about a lot of other things besides of what we're voting on. Coming here today, it's been very difficult, sitting here for the last how many hours hearing all these public comments as our head goes back and forth on decisions, having not close but distant family in this department that made a comment here today, but mostly thinking of the oath of office. We took an oath of office, follow our state law, but yet we do have to factor in that emotion and what's best for our county. Where we're at, where we need to be in the next year or two, or even further down the road. And I'm going to echo something that our chair had said today, except for mine's a little different. You can't vote with your head or your heart. And I just ask everyone to vote with their gut instinct on this, because your gut will never be wrong. Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, we'll go to the voter board. In a moment, in a moment. Don't start pushing buttons.
Can you restate the motion? It's been a long time. Thank you. That works. I mean, we're still.
Got the resolution.
Right, yes.
Well, it'd be the original resolution, okay?
Yes.
As amended.
Thank you.
So the original resolution, as amended, took out court security and jail lieutenant.
Retirement.
We good to go? Linda?
And again, a yes vote will move them from protected to general. A no vote will retain them in the current status.
Correct. Right. Okay. All right, let's go.
Yeah.
You could do this, Bill. 4 yes, 17 no. So they remain protected.
You should stay and protect.
No, what did you do?
Longer.
Four yes.
If they sit at my knee,
We're walking from now.
Okay, special reports. New business. Any oral committee reports? Any review of committee minutes? Vouchers, claims, and bills. Announcements. Next regular county board meeting will be October 23rd at 9 a.m. Per diem code is 927.
927.
Mr. Fisher.
Then, Mr. Chairman, finally, if there's no further business to be transacted, I'd like to make a motion we adjourn.
Can I ask one thing before that happens with the second?
What?
Do you have a code number for the WCA conference that we have to put in our time cards, Mr. Chair?
No, I did not.
Donate it.
Would you like one?
I just didn't want Kenny to be confused on his numbers today.
924, 25, 26.
Let's call it the first day of the conference at 9:24.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.